It was just dinner, or at least that's what I told myself. An ordinary evening meant to celebrate something extraordinary, their engagement. A meal meant to bring everyone together to toast new beginnings, shared futures, and hopefully to recognize the long line of love that led them here. But even before I stepped through the door of that polished restaurant, I felt the ache in my chest, the kind that whispers, "You're walking into something you weren't truly invited to." I had offered to host it at the house, said I'd cook her favorite garlic-roasted chicken scalloped potatoes and the strawberry mousse she used to sneak spoonfuls of as a child. She'd laughed light and quick and said, "Mom, we're not doing anything that outdated." And just like that, my kitchen, the one where she learned to stir, to taste, to talk, was dismissed, like a dusty old attic no one wanted to visit. Still I came. I brought a gift, a bouquet, and that hope only mothers carry, that maybe once she sees me she'll soften. Maybe once I'm there I'll belong again. But when I arrived, she was already seated at the far end of the table, radiant, yes, but surrounded. Him, his family, her friends. And when I approached, her eyes flitted past mine, and her smile landed somewhere behind me. I stood for a moment holding the flowers like a question. No one stood. No one made room. I had to ask the waiter myself if he could bring over a chair. He did kindly, placing me just slightly to the side, not quite at the table, but close enough to pretend. Conversation flowed like I wasn't there. They talked about venues, destination packages, silk napkins, and seating charts. I tried to chime in gently, offering an idea about the music, something classical, something timeless. Her fiancé chuckled low and patronizing. "We're going for more of a modern vibe," he said. "No offense." I said none was taken, but inside something buckled. My daughter didn't say a word. She just kept sipping her wine, nodding at his words like they were scripture. At one point, the appetizers came. Platters were passed, hands reaching, forks dancing, but none made their way to me. I watched as they shared shrimp cocktail, as she leaned into his mother and whispered something that made them both laugh. I tried to catch her eye, just once. But even then, she was already turning away somewhere I couldn't follow. I remembered when she was little and insisted I sit next to her at every birthday, every recital, every dinner. Back then, I was her anchor, her safe place. And now I was extra. I fiddled with the napkin in my lap, smoothing it over and over, as though I could iron the wrinkles from this moment. I wasn't angry yet. I didn't have the strength for anger. What I had was confusion, that slow creeping disorientation, when a place you thought was home turns foreign. She didn't introduce me to his family, not even a polite, "This is my mom." I suppose she assumed they knew, or maybe she preferred they didn't. When dessert came, I stood, said I had an early morning. She barely looked up. "Okay, Mom," she murmured, already leaning into another conversation. I walked out with the bouquet still in my hand. No one asked why I brought them. No one asked why I took them back. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before driving home. I didn't cry, not yet. Instead, I thought about the empty seat at that long table and how it fit me too well. Sometimes it's not what's said that wounds you. It's what's missing. A name not spoken, a place not saved, a glance not given, and somehow that cuts deeper than words ever could. I clutched the steering wheel the whole way back, gripping it like it was the only thing still connecting me to something solid. That night I placed the flowers in water. They bloomed softly on my kitchen counter, looking too bright for such a quiet house. I made myself tea, sat by the window, and whispered to no one I was there. I showed up, and I suppose that's where the betrayal begins, not in absence but in presence, met with dismissal. I wish I could say it happened all at once, that one day she loved me and the next she didn't. But the truth is far more insidious. It wasn't a slap or a scream. It was a tone, a shift, a slow cooling like summer fading into autumn without anyone quite noticing until the leaves had already turned brittle. The first time I truly heard it was on the phone a few weeks after that dinner. I had called to ask how the planning was going to offer a hand, a ride, anything at all. "I'm a little busy, Mom," she said. Not unkindly, not angrily, just clipped. Like my voice had been added to her to-do list, an item to manage, not a comfort to cherish. I hung up and stared at the phone, trying to make sense of it. She used to call me 3 times a day, used to ramble about shoes coworkers, even the way the sky looked on her drive home. Now her silences stretched longer than her sentences. I tried to ignore it, told myself she was just overwhelmed, that planning a wedding was exhausting, and I should be patient. But deep down I knew. A mother always knows. The next time we spoke, I asked if she wanted help picking out her dress. I had dreamed of that moment, the two of us standing in a boutique, her twirling in white, me crying behind my glasses. But she hesitated, and then she said it lightly. "I already went with his mom. She knows all the right designers." Just like that, like a shoe already tied, like a decision already made. I laughed, too high, too false. "Of course," I said, even though I felt something folding inside me. It wasn't just the dress. It was the way she spoke to me now, like she was always watching the clock. Her voice used to rise when she was excited, used to tumble over itself when she was nervous. But now it stayed flat, measured, like she had trained herself not to say too much around me. And if I ever brought up the past, the way I used to braid her hair, the stories we made up on rainy afternoons, she'd hum politely and pivot the conversation. "Anyway, have you seen that new show on Netflix?" I started second-guessing everything. Was I calling too often? Was I embarrassing her? Had I done something, or worse, been someone she was trying to outgrow? I felt like a sweater she'd loved as a child, but now found too itchy to wear in public. I caught myself apologizing for things I didn't understand, for asking about the florist, for reminding her about the family recipe she used to beg me to make. Every word I spoke felt like it might be the one to push her further away. She once told me years ago that my voice calmed her, that hearing me say, "Everything's going to be all right," was better than any pill or therapist. But now I said those same words, and they echoed unanswered, unwelcome. I'd leave voicemails and she'd reply in texts. I'd write her long emails and she'd answer with a thumbs-up emoji. There was a Sunday I remember especially well. I baked her favorite almond cake and brought it over unannounced. I used to do that all the time. She'd laugh, scold me for spoiling her, then cut a slice right there at the door. But that day she opened the door with her phone still pressed to her ear. "Mom, I'm in the middle of something," she whispered. Her eyes flicked to the cake. "Maybe don't just show up, okay?" I nodded, stepping back. "Of course, I'm sorry." She didn't invite me in, just closed the door gently, as if kindness could soften the slam. I took the cake home, ate a slice alone in my kitchen. It tasted like sugar and surrender. That evening I wrote her a letter, not to mail, just to write. I told her how much I missed the version of us that used to be inseparable. I told her how my world had gotten smaller since she began pulling away, that when she drifted, I didn't just lose a daughter, I lost a rhythm, a heartbeat, a thread that tethered my days together. I folded the letter and placed it in my drawer where it stayed unread, like most of the love I still carried. Some people think betrayal comes from loud acts, from shouting, from slamming doors, from breaking things. But the worst kind is quiet. The kind that slips into your days like fog. The kind that lets you think maybe this is just a phase. Maybe she'll come back. Maybe I'm just imagining it. But every conversation was colder, every call shorter, until eventually you realize you're no longer someone she wants to talk to. You're just someone she has to. And even then I held on, because that's what mothers do. We hold on even when our hands are bleeding from it. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I realized I was no longer part of her plans. I was sitting on the back porch, folding laundry slow and steady, like I always had, when I got a group text meant for the wedding party. The message was full of excitement, flower arrangements, custom calligraphy, a cake tasting set for Sunday. My name wasn't in the greeting, just a cheery "Hi everyone," followed by a list of people I didn't recognize, and one name that made my stomach twist, his mother's. She had taken my place, and she was wearing it like it had always belonged to her. I sat there for a while staring at the phone in my hand, the linen towel half folded in my lap. I had imagined this process since the day my daughter first talked about love, how we'd laugh over color swatches, debate over seating charts, and maybe even argue a little about the guest list. But always together, always with me. Instead, I was getting leftover updates in a group chat, a ghost in the background of her new life. I scrolled up through the messages and found photos, mood boards, tablescapes with gold-edged plates and minimalist greenery. A caption under one read, "Mom loved this look." And there it was, not me. Her mom now meant someone else. I blinked hard, pressing my thumb to the screen like I could rub the words away. But they stayed. That night I called her. My hands were shaking before she even picked up. I saw the text. I said, keeping my voice light. Sounds like things are really coming together. She hummed in agreement, distracted. I could hear voices in the background, laughter, clinking glasses. "We've just been trying to keep things streamlined," she said. "It gets messy when too many people are involved." You know, I wanted to ask, am I too many? Am I the mess you're trying to clean up? But instead, I said, "Of course, sweetheart," and nodded even though she couldn't see me. I hung up and walked through my own house like a stranger. I stopped in front of the glass cabinet where I kept all the things she'd made as a child. Finger paintings, broken clay animals, glitter-glued cards that said, "Mommy, you're my best friend." I opened it, slowly ran a finger along the edge of one paper heart and whispered, "I still am." A few days later, I got a forwarded email from the florist. Apparently, my address had been listed incorrectly, and they needed confirmation. I replied only to get a message from the planner saying, "I believe this is being handled by the groom's family now." The groom's family. As if I wasn't real. As if I hadn't spent nights sewing costumes for her school plays, staying up when she had nightmares building the very life she now erased me from. I tried one last time to find a place in the planning. I offered to make the wedding favors small lavender sachets I'd once made for her ballet recitals, scented with patience and pride. She paused on the phone, said, "It's sweet, but I think we're going for something more, elevated this time. Elevated." As if the things I offered came from a basement she didn't want anyone to see. I didn't cry, not then. Not even after she thanked me with that soft, strained voice that told me she was just being polite. I sat quietly on the edge of my bed, folding my hands in my lap, and remembered how she used to come into my room without knocking, curl up beside me, and whisper all her dreams into the night. I had been the keeper of her hopes. Now I wasn't even allowed to touch the edges of her joy. A few weeks later, I heard from a neighbor that there was going to be a bridal shower. "Aren't you excited?" she asked. I smiled, nodded, said all the right things. I didn't tell her I hadn't been invited. I didn't say I found out only because someone else mentioned it in passing. I didn't let her see how small I felt, how forgotten. Because somewhere along the way, I had learned how to make silence look like grace. That night I sat with a photo album in my lap, her first birthday, her first steps, her toothless grin in second grade, and I realized this wasn't just about the wedding. It was about everything that came before and everything being erased after. I was no longer part of the story, just the prologue no one wanted to read aloud. And still I held on, because mothers do. We hope past the point of sense. We reach for hands that have already let go. We keep making room at our table, even when no one is coming. The invitation finally arrived in the mail, heavy cardstock embossed, lettering a pale blush ribbon tied just so. It was beautiful, I'll admit that. Cold, but beautiful. My name was listed not with any affection or title, just printed like an afterthought among dozens of others. I held it carefully, fingers tracing the gold-inked edges, and tried to feel something besides that dull throb in my chest. This was supposed to be a moment of pride. Instead, it felt like I had been given a ticket to a show where I didn't belong on the stage, just in the shadows. A week later, she called, not to ask how I was, not to say she missed me, but to talk about the dress code. "We're doing neutrals for the family," she said. "Beiges, creams, soft pastels. Nothing too dark or too bold." I could hear her scrolling through something on her end, distracted. "Oh, and nothing lace. Or anything too old-fashioned. You know what I mean, right?" There was a pause, and then she added, almost as an afterthought, "I just don't want the guests to get the wrong idea about our style. It's going to be very curated." I swallowed hard. Curated, I repeated. The word tasted foreign, like something you do to a museum exhibit. Not a wedding, not family, not a mother. I had already been sewing, quietly, for weeks. A soft blue dress with embroidered cuffs modeled after the one my mother wore at my own wedding, a tribute, a memory. And yes, it had lace. Small touches, delicate and lovely, stitched with hands that had trembled from both love and heritage. I hadn't told her yet I wanted to surprise her. Foolish, I know. That night I took the half-finished dress from its place on the mannequin. I held it up to the light. It looked wrong now. Not because of its style, but because I had made it with a heart that still believed I had a place beside her. I folded it carefully, tucked it into the cedar chest beneath my bed, and whispered, "I'll wear it somewhere. I'm wanted." I went shopping the next day. A sterile boutique with a young clerk who called me ma'am and suggested a taupe shift dress that clung in all the wrong places. I stared at myself in the mirror under fluorescent lights, gray roots, catching the glare, the dress limp against my skin. I looked like a placeholder, a shape, not a person, not a mother. I smiled at the clerk, pretended to think about it, and left empty-handed. On the way home, I stopped at a small cafe, the kind she and I used to visit after errands when she was little. We'd sit by the window, split a slice of cake, and play wedding, imagining what her day would be like, who she'd marry, what I'd wear. "You'll look like a queen," she used to say. "Everyone will know you're my mom." And I believed her. Now even the idea of me made her flinch. A few days later, I got a message from her, a link to a dress she thought might suit me better. It was beige, sleeveless, plain. "It won't draw attention," she wrote, followed by a smiling emoji. I stared at the screen, heart heavy. I wasn't trying to draw attention. I was trying to exist, to be seen, to be beside her, not in her way. I replied with a simple, "Thanks," and ordered the dress. It arrived in a flat box, folded like an apology. I hung it in the closet and tried not to look at it, tried not to remember the way she used to twirl in front of the mirror wearing my old scarves, calling herself my mini-me. She used to want to look like me. Now she didn't even want me to be mistaken as part of her. I told myself I was being dramatic, that she was just stressed, that weddings made people act strangely. But those were excuses, soft little lies we tell ourselves, to keep from drowning in the truth. And the truth was this: she didn't want my presence to stain her image. My love, my labor, my wrinkles, They didn't fit her vision board. I didn't cry that night. I just sat in the quiet of my bedroom, the beige dress hanging like a ghost in the corner, and I let the silence speak. It told me what she wouldn't, that I had become inconvenient, embarrassing even, something to be managed, not celebrated. And still I showed up. Because love, real, raw, stubborn love, doesn't disappear when it's no longer welcomed. It stays. It lingers. It hurts. But it also watches and waits. Because even in that moment with my pride folded like a paper crane in the closet, I wasn't done. Not yet. It was late one evening when I heard it, a moment not meant for my ears. I had stopped by her house with a jar of homemade marmalade, her favorite, the one with orange peel cinnamon and a hint of ginger, just the way she liked it as a child. I'd made a habit of leaving small things like that on her doorstep, trying to weave myself back into her life, one quiet kindness at a time. But this time the porch light was on, and their car was in the driveway. I thought maybe I'd knock. As I approached the door, I heard voices inside hers, tight and whispering, and his louder, sharper with that edge I had never grown to trust. I froze, hand just inches from the doorknob. I didn't mean to listen. I didn't mean to stay, but something in his tone nailed me to the spot. I told you, he said, voice rising like a blade being drawn. She's your problem, not mine. I'm not building a future that includes all that. I didn't hear her answer right away, just silence. And then softly, like she was tired, she's just trying to help. Another pause, and then the words that took the air from my lungs. Well, she's not helping. She's in the way. In the way. I stood there, marmalade in hand, the jar warming in my palm while my body turned cold. I wasn't crying, not yet. I wasn't even breathing. I was just standing there, listening to a man dismiss 30 years of mothering like it was an obstacle. I thought of the nights I stayed up beside her when she had the flu, the time I drove through a snowstorm to bring her a forgotten project, the years I worked double shifts to pay for her piano lessons, her braces, her dreams. But to him, I was just her problem. And to her, she didn't defend me. Not really. She didn't say, she's my mother. She didn't say, she belongs. She said nothing. And sometimes silence is worse than cruelty, because silence is choice. I turned and walked away before they could see me. I left the marmalade on the porch, not as a gift, but as a mark, proof that I had been there, that I had tried one more time. And as I drove home, the city lights blurred behind my windshield like melting stars. I didn't play the radio. I didn't curse or scream. I just sat with it, let it settle, let the truth crack open inside me, slow and brutal. For weeks after I replayed that moment in my mind, wondered if she said more after I left, wondered if she ever stood up for me once the door was closed. But each time I tried to picture it, all I could see was her face that night at dinner, smiling at him, nodding, choosing him. I used to be her first choice. Now I was her obligation, her burden. The name, she said, with tight lips and lowered eyes. I began to withdraw, slowly. Not in anger, I didn't have the strength for that, but in weariness. I stopped texting unless she reached out first. I stopped offering to help. I stopped checking in about the wedding. She didn't notice. Or if she did, she said nothing. I suppose that made it easier, for both of us. I spent my days moving quietly through my house, dusting picture frames I couldn't bring myself to take down, folding linens I'd never use for guests, drinking tea I no longer brewed for two. I tried to busy myself, tried to fill the silence with action. But no matter how much I cleaned, there was always that ache in the walls, the absence of her voice, the ghost of her laughter. I started writing in a journal again, not because I thought anyone would read it, but because I needed to put the weight somewhere. I wrote about the marmalade, about the word problem, about how I used to be her whole world, and now I was a footnote. I wrote so I wouldn't forget who I was, so I wouldn't lose myself trying to stay in a place I was no longer welcome. And in the stillness of those entries, something began to stir. Not anger, not yet, but clarity. A kind of quiet recognition that maybe the way she was treating me, the way he talked about me, wasn't just careless, it was cruel. And the longer I allowed it, the more it would carve away at me. I looked at myself in the mirror one morning, really looked. My face had changed. More lines, yes, but also something else, something deeper, a hardness in the eyes, a weariness in the mouth. I realized I hadn't smiled in weeks. Not really. Not the kind of smile that comes from feeling loved. And that's when I knew something had to give. Because I wasn't a problem. I was a person, a mother, a woman who had spent decades giving, holding, carrying. I had value even if they didn't see it, even if they never said it aloud. And I would not beg to be seen by people who had already chosen to look away. The first time they visited after the engagement, something subtle shifted, not just in the way they spoke, but in how they moved through my house. It was no longer a place of shared memories, but a stopover, a box to check off on their weekend agenda. They came in without warmth, without ceremony. No hug, no hi mom, just a breeze of perfume, the clang of car keys and footsteps that didn't pause in the hallway like they used to. He walked past the living room, scanned the space like a realtor, inspecting a fixer-upper, then muttered, "She really should consider updating this place." As if I weren't right there dusting the shelves, hearing every syllable. My daughter didn't flinch. She just smirked and said, "I've told her. But you know she's stuck in her ways." I stood still, holding a photograph of her at 7 front teeth, missing arms wide like she could fly. I wanted to ask, "Is that what I am now, an old painting that embarrasses you?" But I said nothing. Just gently placed the frame back on the shelf where it suddenly felt out of place. I made tea, the kind she used to love, jasmine with a little honey. When I handed her the mug, she didn't say thank you. She didn't even look. She was scrolling through her phone, showing him pictures of table settings. I stood there awkwardly for a moment, then turned to fetch sugar, even though I knew she no longer used it. When I came back, the cup was untouched. Later, I offered them lunch. "I made your favorite," I said, hopeful. "Roasted chicken and sweet corn biscuits." She wrinkled her nose. "We're doing low carb," she said. "You should try it. It might be good for you, too." Her eyes flicked to my waist, then back to her phone. I looked down at my hands, the same hands that had packed her school lunches, stitched her Halloween costumes, clapped the loudest at her recitals. And suddenly they felt useless, foreign. He asked if there was Wi-Fi, not with a question mark, just as a demand. I told him the password, but he sighed when it took a few seconds to connect. "Seriously, how do you live like this?" he muttered, more to her than me. She laughed, not nervously, not apologetically, just laughed. They moved around the house as if they owned it, opened cupboards without asking, left dishes in the sink, played music too loud. At one point, I heard him call her from the other room. "Hey, can you grab your mom's mop? I spilled." "No, where is it?" "No, do you mind? Just an order." And she obeyed. I came into the kitchen to see her wiping the floor while he scrolled on his phone. "You didn't have to do that," I said gently. She shrugged. "It's fine. He's tired." Tired. I wanted to scream. Tired. But I bit my tongue again. I kept trying. I brought out the photo albums, laid them on the coffee table like offerings. "Remember this trip?" I asked. pointing to a beach photo, her tiny hands covered in sand. She glanced down, then up at him. "I looked so awkward as a kid," she said with a laugh. He looked at the picture, then back at her. "You really grew into yourself," he said, squeezing her thigh. I waited for her to say something, anything, to say, "That was one of the best summers of my life." But she didn't. She just turned the page without looking. And that's when I realized they weren't visiting me. They were using my home as a backdrop for their performance, a place to play out their couplehood, to practice their life before they cut me out entirely. I wasn't the hostess. I wasn't even a guest. I was the wallpaper. By the time they left, the house was a mess. Pillows tossed, crumbs on the floor, empty glasses scattered on the end tables. I followed them to the door, trying to find the right words to say something, to ask her if she remembered who I was. But all I got was a rushed hug and a "thanks, Mom," as she slid into the passenger seat. The car pulled away, and I stood at the doorway long after the taillights disappeared. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the hallway. I turned back into the house and saw it the way their presence lingered like smoke after a fire. I walked through each room, slowly picking up the pieces they had left behind, but I didn't clean right away. I sat on the edge of the couch and let it all settle. I thought about how she used to sing in that kitchen, how we used to dance barefoot while baking cookies. I thought about how she used to say, "This is my favorite place in the world." And now I was just a housekeeper in my own memory. Something shifted in me that night, a slow, quiet breaking, not from a single blow, but from years of small cracks finally meeting in the middle. I wasn't going to beg to be treated with kindness in the very space I had built. I wasn't going to shrink myself to fit into the margins of their perfect little wedding. I had given her everything, and now I was invisible. But invisibility has a strange power. When no one's watching, you can move however you like. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for a Friday evening. I had marked the date on the kitchen calendar weeks in advance, circled it in soft pencil so I could erase and recircle it again and again. I told myself that was just habit, that it didn't mean anything, but it did. Every circle was a silent hope, a little prayer that maybe this time they'd remember me, that maybe she'd say, "Of course you're coming, Mom. Of course you're sitting next to me." I had even set aside an outfit, not the beige dress, not the one she picked for the wedding day, something simpler but elegant. A soft green blouse, a skirt with a gentle drape earrings her father gave me the year she was born. I laid them out on the bed like a ritual, polished my shoes, even curled my hair. It sounds foolish now, but I wanted to look like someone she'd be proud to stand beside. The day of the dinner, I waited for the details. I expected a text, a call, an address, something. Nothing came. At noon, I sent a casual message, just checking what time the dinner starts tonight. Should I bring anything? I waited. 1 hour. 2. 3. The bubbles appeared once, then disappeared. No reply. By 5 o'clock, the sun was beginning to lower, turning my curtains gold. I checked my phone again. Still nothing. I walked into the kitchen and boiled water I didn't need, chopped vegetables I had no appetite for. My dress hung over the chair like a ghost of good intentions. At 6:30, I decided to call. Just once. Straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. What could I possibly say? "Hi, it's your mother. I think you forgot I exist." I sat by the window watching the cars go by, imagining her somewhere across town raising a glass, laughing beside candlelight. I pictured her in a white cocktail dress, glowing with that bridal shimmer. I wondered if she told people her mother had passed, or maybe I'd just become a story she didn't bother to tell. Later that evening, I checked social media. I wish I hadn't. There they were, smiling group photos, a long table bathed in warm light, her surrounded by friends and future in-laws. He held her hand in every picture. His mother beamed from the seat beside her. My seat. The one I always thought would be mine. They were tagged at a restaurant not far from here, a place we once passed on a walk, and she said she wanted to try someday, maybe with you. I sat with that sentence for a long time. I turned off my phone and sat in the dark, not crying, not yet, just stunned, stilled, like my body couldn't quite catch up to what my heart already knew. I thought about all the things I had missed over the years because I was busy raising her birthdays of my own weekend trips, career dreams left behind. I thought about all the times I sat in folding chairs at her school, clapping with blistered hands because I didn't want her to feel alone. I thought about how many dinners I cooked with the last bit of money in my purse so she'd never have to know what it meant to go without. And now she couldn't even send an address. It wasn't the dinner that hurt me, it was the erasure. The way she let me dress up in expectation and sit alone in silence. The way she allowed others to celebrate her while pretending I didn't exist. As if the story of her life started with him. As if I had never been the one holding the pen until now. At some point I made tea, sat outside with it. Listened to the wind in the trees, and remembered the last time she had dinner at home, how she said my table was too cluttered, how she picked at her food like it was beneath her. And now she sat at someone else's table toasting a life she built on the bones of the one I gave her. I thought about driving to the restaurant, about walking in quietly just to be seen. But no, I still had my dignity, and if no one else at that table would honor it, I would. I stayed home that night in the house I made from scratch, surrounded by memories that still knew my name. I ate leftover soup and a slice of stale bread. I lit a candle for no reason, and I wrote her name in my journal not out of anger, but to remind myself that I still knew how to remember her, even if she had forgotten me. When I closed the book, I made a decision, something subtle. Nothing I'd say aloud, just a shift in my spirit, a line drawn, not as punishment, no, never that, but as a quiet defense, a way to say, I see how you see me now, I see it clearly, and I will no longer keep walking into closed doors. That was the night I stopped checking for her messages. That was the night I realized I was no longer part of the celebration. I was just the lesson she never wanted to claim. It had taken me weeks to prepare it. A simple cream-colored envelope sealed with a small gold sticker and tucked inside was a check, not extravagant, but meaningful. Money saved slowly, quietly over years of small sacrifices. I hadn't told her I was giving it. I didn't want praise or attention. I only wanted to give her something that felt like support, like love. A blessing passed from mother to daughter, the way water is passed from cupped hands. It was meant to help with the photographer, or the music, or whatever little detail she felt she had to shoulder alone. I arrived at her apartment with the envelope in my purse. I had baked cinnamon rolls too warm and sticky, just how she liked them growing up. I knocked gently, heart soft, with hope, the envelope pressed to my chest like a quiet gift. She opened the door, distracted again. Always distracted. Oh, Mom, you didn't tell me you were coming. No kiss, no welcome. Just a step aside to let me in like someone letting the delivery person drop off a package. Inside the place was chaos magazines, fabric swatches, half-empty coffee cups, bridal catalogs. He was there too, slouched on the couch, phone in hand, music playing loud enough to make conversation a strained thing. I stood for a few moments with the tray of cinnamon rolls, waiting for someone to say something, to greet me, to notice I was there. They didn't. Not really. So I set the rolls on the counter. Then I reached into my purse, pulled out the envelope, and walked over to her. She glanced up briefly mid-scroll. I know the wedding is a lot, I said gently. I wanted to help a little, just something small. You don't have to use it for anything specific. She took the envelope but didn't open it, just nodded like someone accepting a flyer on the street. "Thanks, Mom," she said before turning back to whatever she was doing. The moment deflated. My offering landed with no more meaning than a napkin. I stood there for a while trying to feel okay, trying to tell myself that it didn't matter how she reacted, only that I gave it. But then I saw him glance at the envelope, his lip curling just slightly. "That from your mom?" he asked, not even looking at me. She nodded. "Yeah, just a little help with stuff." He snorted. "Let me guess. Guilt money." Then louder. "Don't worry, babe. I got this handled." She laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a real one. And that's when something inside me folded sharp and slow. I quietly gathered my purse, told her I had to run an errand. She didn't even walk me to the door. I stepped out into the afternoon light and stood there for a moment, stunned by how bright the world was while I felt so small. I walked down the steps slowly as if gravity had grown heavier. Later that night, as I was setting the table for one again, I remembered the envelope. I had forgotten all about it in the blur of that awkward visit. I told myself maybe she had opened it later. Maybe she had smiled. Maybe something in her had softened. I wanted to believe that, so I called, just to check in. No answer. The next day, I found out from a mutual acquaintance, her friend's mother, that they'd left the envelope behind. "It was just sitting there on the chair after you left," she said, gently trying not to let the shame show in her voice. I thought maybe it was a mistake, but no one touched it. Like they didn't even see it. I sat at the table that night with a cup of tea gone cold, and the image wouldn't leave me, the envelope sitting abandoned, sun catching the edge of the gold sticker untouched, unloved, unneeded. I imagined someone picking it up like trash and setting it aside, not knowing it held weeks of grocery savings, unspoken prayers, and the last drop of hope I had poured into this wedding. I didn't ask for it back. I didn't mention it to her. I waited. 1 day, 2, a week. Nothing. Not even a thank you. Not even a mention. It disappeared into the void of all the other things I'd given that were now too ordinary to acknowledge. I began to wonder if it had ever mattered at all, the baby teeth I held in my palm after she lost them the time I carried her on my back, when her shoes broke at the fair, the nights I sang lullabies until my voice cracked. If all of that could be forgotten as easily as a small envelope on a chair. That was the moment I stopped reaching out, not in anger but in sorrow. I realized I had been handing her pieces of my heart for years, and she'd been dropping them behind her like crumbs. She never planned to follow back. I thought I was guiding her forward, but maybe I was just trying to hold on to someone who had already let go. I looked in the mirror that night and said something out loud I hadn't dared to before. She doesn't want what I'm offering. And there's a pain in that. A deep pulsing grief in realizing that your love, the purest kind, the mother kind, has become invisible, unwanted, forgotten. But inside that pain, something else began to form. Not rage, not yet, but something steadier, something like resolve. Because I may not be wanted, but I still have worth. And if they couldn't see that maybe it was time I stopped trying to prove it. It happened at the church, a small airy place with high windows and echoes that clung to every whisper. I'd arrived early, dressed simply not in the beige dress she chose, but a pale lavender blouse and dark skirt that made me feel more like myself. Not loud, not flashy, just me. I brought a small bouquet garden roses from my own backyard, trimmed and tied with a ribbon, a gesture, nothing more. When I stepped inside, I paused to take it in. The pews were lined with ivory sashes. Candles flickered along the aisle. A woman with a clipboard scurried past me and gave me a polite nod. "Family?" she asked. I smiled, heart swelling just slightly. Yes, I said. I'm the mother of the bride. Her eyes darted to the list in her hand. She hesitated, then nodded again. Okay. I think you're in the third row right side, not the front, not with her, not even close. I nodded back, too tired to question it, and found my way to the assigned place. As I sat, I saw them, her, him, his parents, bustling near the altar, making final adjustments. She looked radiant, of course, even from a distance, her hair swept up in curls, the silk of her rehearsal dress catching the light. But it was the way she moved around them, orbiting their joy, that struck me. She didn't look once in my direction, not a glance, not even a flicker of recognition. I was background again, wallpaper. Still I smiled, still I held the bouquet. When there was a pause in the activity, I stood and walked softly down the aisle toward her. I didn't want to interrupt. I just wanted to say hello, maybe offer the flowers. Just to be a mother one more time. She saw me approaching and immediately stiffened. Her smile faltered. Her hand reached out, not to hug, not to receive the bouquet, but to touch my arm gently, firmly. Mom, she said through clenched teeth, not now. I started, but she cut me off with a sigh that sounded far too old for her young face. Please, she said, glancing toward the group behind her, don't make a scene. The words hit like a slap, but quieter. No one else seemed to notice, but my ears rang. I blinked, still holding the flowers between us. I wasn't, I said softly. I was just. She looked around, then leaned in. This isn't the time. Okay, just go sit down. And so I did. I turned slowly, trying to keep my face still, my hands steady. I returned to the third row seat. I placed the bouquet beside me, and I folded my hands in my lap, as though I were waiting for something that would never arrive. The rest of the rehearsal blurred. Voices floated. Instructions echoed, laughter rose and fell, but I heard none of it. My mind stayed with that phrase, don't make a scene, as though my very presence had become a disruption, a threat to her curated perfection. When it ended, guests began to mingle. Someone handed out small bags of party favors. A woman I didn't know sat beside me briefly and asked if I was with the groom's side. I shook my head. No, I said. I'm just her mother. The woman smiled vaguely and drifted off. She never came over after, not to say goodbye, not to thank me. She disappeared with him into a back room, swallowed by satin and camera flashes and champagne laughter. I left without saying a word. Outside, the evening light was fading, casting soft shadows across the parking lot. I sat in my car for a long time, bouquet still on the passenger seat. It had started to wilt just slightly, the edges of the petals curling inward, like they too had heard her words. Don't make a scene. I wondered how many times I had swallowed myself for her, how many moments I had stepped back, stayed quiet, played small, and now even that wasn't enough. I had become so invisible that my existing was seen as a disturbance. I drove home slowly, took the long way, past the park where she used to play, the ice cream shop she used to beg me to stop at, the schoolyard, where I once waited in the rain just to walk her home. I saw our history like snapshots blinking past the window, all those moments where I had shown up, where I had stood quietly at the edge cheering her on. And now all she saw was a scene waiting to be avoided. Back at home, I placed the flowers in water, though they were already drooping. I sat at the kitchen table with the lamp turned low and stared at the flickering shadows on the wall. I didn't cry. The tears had turned inward by then, drawing into something heavier, something like knowing. And in that stillness, something inside me stopped trying. Not out of bitterness, no, but out of exhaustion. There was a difference between being quiet and being silenced, and I had been silenced too long. If my love was now a disruption, if my presence required apology, then maybe it was time I left the room altogether. That night I found myself in the attic. I didn't plan to go there. I hadn't stepped foot in that dusty space in years, but something in me needed the silence, the dim light through the small round window, the smell of old linens and forgotten things. I opened the hatch and climbed slowly, the wood creaking beneath my feet, carrying not just my weight, but the weight of everything unsaid. The trunk was still where I left it, wedged beneath a slanted beam covered in a pale blue cloth that had once been part of our living room curtains. I knelt before it, carefully lifting the lid, and the scent of cedar and thyme drifted out to greet me. Inside were her memories, or mine, I suppose, the pieces I had saved of her. Tiny shoes with scuffed toes, a cracked plastic tiara from a princess party, report cards with crooked stars, and then folded beneath a layer of tissue, I found it her first real dress. She was 5 when I made it, pink cotton with white buttons and a hem that wobbled a little at the seams I hadn't sewn in years, but she had begged for something just like the one in the storybook. I stayed up until 3 that night, hunched over the machine with tired eyes, and a full heart, stitching every inch with care. When she saw it the next morning, she squealed and hugged me so hard we both fell over laughing. "You made it just for me," she said, twirling until she was dizzy. "I'm the luckiest girl in the world." I held that dress in my lap now, tracing the faded thread, and wondered where that little girl had gone. The one who used to climb into my bed when thunderstorms rolled in. The one who wrote "I love Mommy" in chalk on the sidewalk and waited for me to find it. The one who couldn't fall asleep unless my hand was on her back. I didn't know when I lost her, or if I lost her, or if she simply outgrew me. But holding that dress, I felt every stitch in my bones, every sleepless night, every scraped knee I'd kissed, every fever I'd sat beside with a cool rag and a whispered lullaby. It wasn't the fabric I cried over, it was the years sewn into it, the years I would never get back. I clutched it to my chest and let the tears fall quietly like rain against an old roof, not because of the wedding, not even because of her cruelty, but because I had tried so hard for so long and still ended up standing outside her life like a stranger pressing a hand to the glass. I rocked back on my heels, eyes closed, remembering the first time she ever hurt my feelings, a silly thing, a forgotten Mother's Day card, and how quickly she apologized, how her little arms wrapped around my waist and she said, "I didn't mean it, Mommy." Back then, her love had weight. It filled rooms. It filled me. Now her love was like mist. You could feel it for a second, but never hold it. I folded the dress and placed it back in the trunk, sat there for a while longer, listening to the wind rattle the eaves, and then I saw it tucked behind a stack of old books, a shoebox I hadn't opened in decades. Inside were letters, notes she'd written me over the years, crayon hearts. "You're the best, Mommy. Don't be sad, I love you. I'll take care of you forever." Forever? I smiled bitterly. Children believe in forever the way they believe in magic, until the world tells them otherwise, until someone convinces them that loving their mother makes them weak or old-fashioned or uncool, until a partner whispers that blood ties don't matter as much as image, as control. I ran my fingers over those notes, over the shaky handwriting that once defined her love, and I realized something important: she hadn't always been this way. This cold, calculated woman, planning a wedding like a marketing campaign. There had been a time when I was her world, and that part of her, even if buried, was real. I wasn't crazy for remembering it. But memory is a one-way street when love stops traveling it both ways, and I couldn't live on nostalgia alone. I couldn't keep loving her 5-year-old self while her grown-up self dismissed me like clutter. That night I made myself a promise. I would stop chasing, I would stop bleeding for someone who had stopped seeing me. I would keep the dress, keep the notes, but I would not keep breaking my heart for someone who no longer thought I was worth even a phone call. Love should not require you to vanish. And I, after everything, still existed, still mattered, still deserved a place in the story, even if she wrote me out of hers. I went to the venue on my own. I wasn't invited for a tour, hadn't been asked to join any of the planning visits, but I needed to see it. I needed to understand where all my efforts, all my memories had been erased. It was an old, restored mansion just outside the city, with ivy crawling up white stone walls and polished floors that looked like melted candlelight when the sun hit just right. I pretended I was there for a future booking, told the young woman at the front desk I was curious about the space. She gave me a short tour chipper and polished, unaware that I wasn't looking for chandeliers or catering options. I was looking for her, for the version of her that used to beg me to tell her fairy tales before bed, to brush her hair into princess braids for school, to kiss her goodnight 3 times so the dreams would be sweet. I was looking for some sign that I hadn't been entirely erased. The event hall was already being set up for another wedding that weekend. Long tables draped in linen centerpieces, waiting to be fluffed. I stepped in slowly, the air scented with peonies and polish. I walked the length of the room, fingers trailing along one table, as if I might feel her through it, through the details she had labored over, through the place she would soon call the beginning of her next life. But there was nothing, no trace of me, no place for me. I lingered by the arch near the main doors, imagining how she'd walk in, veil trailing all eyes on her. I wondered if when that moment came she'd even glance toward the rose. Would she scan the crowd for her mother's face? Or would I be just another neutral-toned blur to match the decor? I turned and stepped into the hallway, high ceilings, gilded sconces, silence so deep it rang in my ears. That's when I heard it, the echo of my own footsteps, slow, measured, alone. I had walked this way before in dreams and daydreams, beside her arm in arm with her, giddy and nervous, asking, "Do I look okay, Mom?" And me whispering, "You look like everything good I've ever done." But those dreams had no place here, not anymore. They belonged to a story I had written alone. I found a bench and sat letting the hush settle around me, and for the first time I didn't imagine her. I didn't reach for a version of her that used to love me. I just sat, quietly, like I was grieving something that had already died. Because in a way I was. I realized then that grief doesn't always come with funerals or farewells. Sometimes it's silent, shapeless, invisible to anyone else. It happens in places like this, echoing hallways where you finally understand that no one is coming to find you, that your love has become a closed chapter in someone else's book, that your presence is now a complication, not a comfort. I looked at the double doors ahead of me, grand, ornate, welcoming to everyone but me, and I thought maybe it's not her wedding that hurts. Maybe it's that she no longer wants me as part of her joy. That truth sank deep, not like a knife, but like a stone in water dropping slow and sure to the bottom of my heart. I stood, smoothed my skirt, gave the bench a soft pat as though to say goodbye. Then I walked back down the hallway, the echo of my steps, once again the only sound that acknowledged me. Outside the light had shifted. A breeze rustled the ivy along the stone walls. I paused on the path, turned back for one final look, not at the venue, but at the space I had once imagined myself in, the place beside her, the space she had filled with others. I didn't cry. I thought I might. But something about that silence, that echo, had done the work already. It had closed the wound with a cool hand. As I drove away, I took the long route again, past the bakery where we used to get apple turnovers on Sundays, past the lake where she caught her first fish, and I cheered so loud the birds scattered, past the old library where she once whispered, "I want to grow up and be just like you." And I realized she had. She had grown up, just not into someone who remembered how to love me. And that perhaps was the quietest heartbreak of all. I hadn't meant to talk to anyone that day. I had stopped by the venue only to drop off a pair of antique candle holders, silver age slightly tarnished, but elegant heirlooms from my mother's wedding offered weeks ago, when I still thought my gesture might mean something. I had mentioned them in a voicemail, unsure if she'd respond, but no one told me not to bring them. So I wrapped them in velvet, tucked them into a small box, and delivered them myself. The staff was busy when I arrived, florists arranging tall glass vases, decorators, tying ribbons to chairbacks, people moving quickly with clipboards and earpieces. I slipped in quietly through the side door, box in hand, making my way to the back, where I thought someone might know where to put it. That's when I heard it, a woman's voice loud over the rustle of tissue paper and floral foam. "Oh, the mother of the bride isn't sitting at the head table, right? That's for the real family." She was in uniform, a caterer, tall and brisk, her arms full of linen napkins, speaking to someone behind her. She didn't see me at first, didn't see how I froze in place, didn't notice the way her words hung in the air like broken glass. I stood there, my breath caught halfway in my throat. Another voice answered. Maybe the coordinator, maybe the planner, I don't know. No, just the couple, their friends, and the groom's parents. Keep it tight. Aesthetic over tradition. Aesthetic over tradition. I stepped back slowly, pressing myself against the wall as though it might swallow me. The box in my hand suddenly felt absurd, heavy with all the wrong things, memory meaning hope. When the caterer finally noticed me, she gave a startled smile. "Oh, sorry, you must be..." "One of the vendors." I shook my head, unable to form words. I tried again. "I'm her mother." Her face changed, not with shame, not with apology, just surprise. As if I didn't match the picture she had been told, as if the idea of the mother of the bride standing here alone, unannounced, didn't quite compute. She reached for the box. "I can take that for you." I handed it over without speaking. My fingers brushed the velvet one last time. "Lovely pieces," she said, not unkindly, "very vintage." I nodded. As I turned to leave, I passed by a table covered in seating cards. I paused, scanned them, row after row of neatly printed names. I found mine near the bottom, not with mother of the bride beneath it, just a name, plain, no title, no role. And I realized I had been removed, not just from the table, but from the story, written out like a character who had lost her purpose in the second act. I walked back to the car, slowly holding the emptiness like something precious. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, keys unmoved in the ignition. The box was gone. The candles would flicker on her wedding day, maybe on the groom's table, maybe near the dance floor. But no one would know whose hands had kept them safe all these years. No one would know how many times I had polished them, thinking of the day she'd walk down the aisle, and how I would be there beaming. No one would know because no one had asked. That night I pulled out an old photo album again, not hers, mine. Pictures of me as a young woman, smiling with wind-blown hair, holding her tiny frame against my chest, not yet knowing how long and painful letting go would be. In every photo, my arms were wrapped around her. In every picture, I was looking at her like she was my whole world. And now I wondered if she would look at a single photo of me that way, or if the new story, the one she had curated with such clean lines and soft palettes, had space only for those who fit the theme. I didn't sleep that night. I walked the house slowly instead, touching the back of chairs, smoothing the throw blanket on the sofa, rearranging the silver frames on the shelf. It was my way of reminding the space and myself that I was still here, that I had mattered, even if they no longer acted like it. At dawn, I brewed coffee, sat on the porch in the quiet pink light, and I thought, if they don't see me, then I will see myself. I would not become small for them. I would not shrink just to fit their picture. And slowly I felt something inside begin to settle. Not peace, not yet, but strength, the kind that grows from standing alone in a room that once belonged to you and saying, "Still I remain." It was supposed to be a small errand, just a quick stop at the boutique to pick up a pair of earrings she'd ordered. She had asked if I'd swing by since it was on my side of town, said she didn't have time to go herself, and the store closed early. I agreed, of course. Even then, even after everything, I still agreed, because part of me, the part trained by years of motherhood, still reached for any excuse to feel useful, to feel wanted. The shop was upscale, the kind with soft lighting, and women who smell like lilacs and wear matching beige suits. When I walked in, the woman behind the counter greeted me with a tight smile, like she was already calculating how long until I'd leave. I gave her my daughter's name, and she disappeared into the back. While I waited, I wandered past a row of mannequins dressed in wedding gowns, sleek silhouettes, glittering beadwork lace that looked like frost caught in moonlight. I paused at one, staring at the intricate detail on the bodice. My fingers hovered over the fabric, but I didn't touch it. I just stood there, wondering if this was the one she chose, wondering if she had stood in front of this same dress with someone else by her side. "Don't touch the display," the clerk said, returning with a small box. I took it, thanked her, and turned to leave. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the ache I carried into that store, or maybe it was the photographs on the wall, smiling brides flanked by their glowing mothers, framed in soft focus and pride. I swallowed hard and asked, "Do you know which dress she picked?" The woman raised a brow. "Are you a friend of the bride?" I shook my head. "I'm her mother." She blinked a little too fast. "Oh," she said. "I didn't realize. She was here with her mother-in-law." The word slid past my skin like cold water. Her mother-in-law. Not me. That was who had been at her side, holding the train gushing over the fabric, fastening the pearls. That was who would be in the photos, immortalized in satin and celebration. I stood there a moment too long. She mentioned the photographer's aesthetic was very clean, the woman added, trying and failing to be helpful. Minimal, no clutter, very curated, and then softer. She said she didn't want anyone in the photos who didn't match the tone. Didn't match the tone. I nodded slowly. I didn't need to hear more. I had heard everything. I walked out into the fading daylight, the earrings box pressed to my chest like a wound. I sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel. Thought about all the times I'd dressed her for picture day, smoothed her hair with my fingers, wiped ketchup off her cheek right before I clicked the camera. And now, I was a disruption to be cropped out, a visual mismatch. I didn't cry. Not then. Not as I drove home. Not even as I placed the earrings on her doorstep without ringing the bell. But later that night, in the privacy of my quiet kitchen, something inside me gave out. I placed my palms flat on the table, leaned over like I was holding myself together by will alone. And I wept, not from anger, from grief. Deep, maternal grief that only comes from knowing you've lost someone who still walks and breathes and carries your name in their blood, but not in their heart. It was no longer about the dress, or the photos, or even the wedding. It was about being erased. Not just from a single day, but from the future she was building, room by room, table by table, photo by photo. And finally I said it, out loud, to the dark room, to the tea growing cold, to the silence that had become my only honest company. She doesn't want me there. Not just at the wedding, in her life. Not the way I had hoped, not the way I had poured myself into. And that was the final straw. I straightened, walked to the drawer where I kept the wedding details she'd once shared, the schedule, the RSVP, the half-written speech I had thought I might give. I took them all and placed them in a brown envelope, sealed it, walked it to the fireplace, and fed it page by page to the flames. It wasn't rage, it was release, because I could no longer keep pretending I hadn't heard her with her words, with her silences, with her choices. And if she didn't want me in the picture, I would not fight to stay in the frame. There comes a moment when sorrow turns quiet, not numb, not cold, just still. The kind of stillness that settles after a storm when every tree has bent, every leaf has fallen, and the sky doesn't know whether to rain again or simply remain gray. That was the place I found myself the morning after the earring, standing barefoot in my kitchen robe, pulled tight, tea cooling beside the sink, and silence ringing in my ears. I didn't plan it. I didn't sit down and draft a strategy or decide I was going to make a grand gesture. No, it came like muscle memory, like the last instinct of someone who has nothing left to offer but her own retreat. The venue booking had been made months ago, not by her, not by him, but by me, quietly, discreetly under my name with a deposit paid from my savings. She had come to me back then, teary-eyed and stressed, saying the places they wanted were too expensive, too booked, too far away. I had seen her face and thought, of course I'll help. That's what mothers do. I told her I'd cover it, just the venue, just to take some pressure off. She had hugged me back when hugs still meant something. She never mentioned it again, never asked how the payments were going, never offered to reimburse a single dime. It had become background, like me. That morning I stood in the entryway of my home phone in hand, staring at the contract I had printed long ago and never filed. The name on it was mine, the signature mine, the email mine. I dialed. The woman at the venue was kind, professional. "Hi, yes. How can I help you?" she asked. I swallowed hard. "This is regarding the wedding on the 17th. My name is on the contract. I'd like to cancel the booking." There was a pause on the other end. "Oh, may I ask the reason for the cancellation?" I considered lying. I considered saying something about illness, about rescheduling, about plans changing. But instead I answered simply, "Because I'm no longer welcome at the event I paid for." Her tone shifted, softened. "I'm so sorry to hear that." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Yes," I said. "Me too." She informed me of the cancellation terms. I understood them, accepted the penalty, asked if they would send confirmation to my email. They would. It was done in less than 5 minutes. 5 minutes to unwrite a piece of history. 5 minutes to reclaim something I had offered in love, but which had become a token of my own humiliation. When I hung up, I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt relieved. Not because I wanted to hurt her, never that, but because I had finally stepped out of a role I had been performing too long. The role of the uninvited benefactor, the invisible backbone. I sat in my armchair by the window, the sunlight filtering through the lace curtains, and let the silence stretch long around me. I imagined the ripple effect, the calls she would receive, the confusion, the scramble, and I braced myself for the rage. I knew it would come, not because she loved me, but because I had interrupted the image, because I had broken her curated perfection. But I didn't flinch, I didn't panic, because for once I had made a choice for myself. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. Her name flashed on the screen. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not yet. Her voicemail came in seconds later, sharp, high-pitched, frantic. "Mom, what did you do? Why would you cancel the venue? Do you know how much that's going to mess up? Call me back, please." I played it once, then again. Her voice cracked at the end, not with grief, but with fury, disguised as desperation. I didn't respond. Instead, I made soup. I listened to the radio. I watched the light shift across the room, and I realized something quietly astonishing. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel like the villain. I felt calm for the first time in months. Because I had not ruined her wedding. I had simply removed myself from a place where I was no longer wanted and taken with me the peace I had provided. I thought of the words she had said so often lately. "Don't make a scene. Don't draw attention. Don't get in the way." Well, I hadn't made a scene. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't accused. I had simply stepped back and let the silence say everything. I went to bed early that night, pulled the covers high and curled onto my side. I didn't cry. I didn't toss. I just lay there listening to the gentle hum of the house I had built, the house where every corner still whispered her name. And I said just once under my breath, like a lullaby meant for myself. I gave her everything, but I won't give her my dignity. The first 3 days after I canceled the venue passed with no response beyond that single voicemail. No follow-up, no knock at the door, no text, nothing. I thought maybe they were busy scrambling, rearranging, trying to salvage the image. Or maybe in this thought hurt more than I expected. Maybe they simply didn't care enough to fight. Maybe my absence wasn't a loss, just an inconvenience. I waited not because I wanted them to beg or apologize, but because some small bruised part of me still wondered if she'd come, if she'd sit across from me with tear-filled eyes and say I didn't know, I didn't realize I was doing this to you. But the knock never came. On the 4th day I got a message, short, cold, transactional. "We found another venue. Don't worry about it." No greeting, no acknowledgement, no trace of the word mom, just dismissal in black and white, as if I had returned a pair of shoes and the shop no longer needed my business. I stared at that message for a long time, thumb hovering over the reply button. But what could I say? You didn't even notice I was gone. Or worse, you did and didn't care. I didn't respond. I set the phone down and walked into the garden. The rosemary bush needed trimming. The soil needed turning. Life, as always, kept needing things. So I let the quiet wrap around me and I listened to the birds, the wind, the sound of my shears clipping through old stems. I focused on what I could touch, what I could still nurture. The wedding went ahead 2 weeks later. I wasn't invited. Not officially. There was no mailed update, no call, no last-minute olive branch. I only knew the day because of the chatter from a neighbor's daughter who had seen photos posted online. "She looked beautiful," she said casually, not realizing how each word brushed against an old bruise. I didn't go online to look. I didn't need to see my own absence captured in perfect lighting and $1,000 florals. I knew how it would be a head table without me, a dance without a mother's eyes watching a photo album I would never be asked to hold. And still I felt oddly peaceful, not happy, not proud, but still. Because for the first time in years, I hadn't swallowed my pain just to keep the illusion alive. I had stepped away, not in bitterness, but in self-respect. I had chosen the hard thing, the honest thing, and there is a dignity in that, a quiet, heavy kind of power that doesn't need to shout to be heard. That evening, as they danced under rented chandeliers and raised glasses to a future built on selective memory, I baked bread, kneaded it slowly, let it rise under a cloth my mother once embroidered. I filled my kitchen with warmth, not because anyone else would taste it, but because I still deserved good things, kind things, even if I had to give them to myself. After the bread cooled, I made a cup of tea, sat by the window. Outside, the moon hung low and full soft as an old lullaby. I watched it for a long time, thought about the girl she used to be, thought about the woman I had become. And then I whispered it, not with anger, not with sadness, but with a simple, steady truth. I didn't lose her. She walked away. I pressed my hand to my chest and breathed in deeply. I was still here. I still had stories. I still had mornings ahead, and people who saw me not as an accessory, not as a nuisance, but as a whole human being. Some doors once closed do not reopen, but the air beyond them is wide.